Uh, who even needs a pilot these days, right? I mean, you got autopilot, planes fly themselves. Not necessarily. Welcome to the superpilotish channel. My name is Graham Wilson, and today in my basement, I will be telling you all about, well, as much as I know about autopilots and give you a few tips. And oh, hey, I see Nefarious here is in the chat already. Join in the chat if you want, people. The other day I was talking about some autopilot stuff, and I was kind of like checking my head while I was saying it as an expert in my basement. And I was like, I don't know, I think that's kind of wrong or not quite right. And so I thought, okay, I better clear the air on autopilots. What I know, I haven't done a whole lot of flying with autopilots at all. Definitely not in any big jets or anything like that. But I wanted to make sure, just like it, I'm a flight instructor, so the it's like as a flight instructor, you can't just go out and say like, "Yeah, I know all this stuff," and you're like, "No, I don't." You can't do that. You got to make sure that you say, I'm not sure. I'll get back to you on it. So any good instructor will always say, I'll get back to you. I didn't even say that, I don't think, but I'm getting back to you. So, oh, hey, Wrench, I see you in the chat. So here we go. Autopilot tips. I was looking at the history of autopilots, and it goes back really like a long, long, long time. Like back to first autopilot was in like 1918 or something. Like they've been around for 100 years. I knew that in World War II, the bombers had, I think, the Lancaster and the B-17s. I remember hearing they had some sort of a wing leveling device that would allow them to hold a heading, and they could correct it every once in a while. So, okay, it was around then. But the most important thing as an instructor to tell you, and well, you know what? I'll start off with the story, and that'll get to my tips. Okay, so the very first time I ever used an autopilot myself was on my multi IFR flight test. The absolute worst time that you could even try fooling around with an autopilot, because there was I didn't know. Like I thought at the time, okay, oh, I thought you had to hand bomb everything. You couldn't use the autopilot that was on the airplane. Nowadays, they expect if you're doing some kind of instrument flying and you have that apparatus, all that equipment there in the plane, the examiner wants to see that you can use it, because that's really how you would be flying most of the time anyways, if you're going through cloud and stuff. So it was like I saw some guys doing this in the flight simulator at school, and they're like, oh wow, you can use the autopilot on the flight test. And they said, yeah. I'm like, oh cool, easy, autopilot flies itself, right? Well, not necessarily. So the very first time I ever flew myself into a cloud was on my instrument flight test, and it was a multi-engine, so there's two engines there. And then here I go into the cloud for the very first time ever. I'd briefly been in a cloud once before, and I was like, and I told the instructor to take control, and we got out of the cloud. But this is the first time here I am. I'm flying it directly into the cloud. Never been in that in my life on my flight test. And here we go. And I'm all dizzy and all weird, because that's what happens if you go into the cloud. And that's why you have to train for this type of stuff. Oh, hey, Harold. Welcome back. See Harold Cheeseburger in the chat here. So so I'm in the cloud. My inner ear is all messed up. I'm all messed up. And then the what is it? The examiner said something like, "Oh, your engine's running rough." I'm like, "Oh, okay, I know. You're supposed to do, like, you're supposed to fail an engine on a flight test." Oh, it's like, okay, I'll shut the engine down or something like that, and which is totally wrong. That's why I failed the test the first time. But so now I'm flying through the cloud, all messed up, and the engine. I was like, okay. I remember the guy in the simulator said, "Oh yeah, just put it on the autopilot." So I put the autopilot on the airplane with only one engine of the two engines flying, and it was managing to hold the altitude. But I noticed that the airspeed was going down and down and down and down. And I'm looking at it like, I don't know what's going on. And this is a flight test, and I'm all stressed out and messed up in the head. The airspeed's going down. And I'm like, and I don't know what to do. And then, so the examiner saw what was going on here, and you can't let your airspeed go down too low. So what happened was the plane was yawing a lot, and I didn't have any rudder input in there. So there was all this drag on the airplane, which made it so it couldn't go fast enough. And it probably would have been able to stay in the air, maybe, if I could let it go. But he said, step on the ball. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you got to do that. So there we go. I failed the test right there, but we kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And it just got worse after that. I ended up failing, but got it the second time. So that was okay. But yeah, so you don't want to be using your autopilot like all the time. Like the first time by yourself in the cloud on a flight test. Don't do that. And so the most important thing that you should remember is that for the autopilot, that on the whiteboard, you are the pilot. That autopilot is just there to kind of help you out. I made the mistake of thinking that, oh, I'll just do this, and I don't even have to fly the plane. That'll bring my stress level down for the flight test, and that didn't work at all. But yeah, in the simulator, you don't notice when the plane's yawing or something because you're just looking at a computer screen. So, anyways, you are the pilot. So, if you are going to be flying with an autopilot, you got to think about it as basically like driving your car with cruise control. Okay, you're still the driver of the car. It just makes your job a little bit easier, so you don't have to, you can maintain a constant speed by putting on the cruise control. And then they even have like lane assist now with the newer cars and all this other fun stuff. That's true, but you are still the driver, and it's just there to kind of help you out, and you don't want to rely on it because these systems can fail. So it's rare, but it does happen. So if your system of the autopilot does fail, you had better know. How could I put this down here? Know the system. Know the system. So every there we go. Know how your autopilot works, because there's all kinds of different kinds, and I always thought there was just like kind of this or that. Big jets, it's all very computerized and everything like that. On smaller airplanes, it can be somewhat computerized with electronic help. Maybe there's autopilot systems that you can put on planes that are designed kind of aftermarket, that it didn't, maybe it's a really old plane like a 1968 Cessna 172. But you can get like autopilots that are kind of aftermarket for that, and they work differently than if you bought a 1971 Beach Bonanza with an autopilot. It's all set up differently. You can have mechanical clutches that engage with rotary wheels, or like little cables and pulleys and stuff. There's electronic, there's computerized, there's all this other stuff. And it seems to me I remember something about years ago, they had some sort of wing leveling device where they had like some mercury in a tube, and then like kind of like a little curved tube, and then like if the plane was banking too much, the mercury would slosh over, make an electrical connection, and then make the ailerons move so that it would go back. So this mercury would be kind of sloshing back and forth, making electrical connections, and that would keep the wings level. I tried to find a example of that on the internet, couldn't find it, but oh well, I heard that exists. And yeah, so you got to know the system, how it works, and the way that you would, and that would also help you if you had, say, a trim runaway or something wonky happens. I've had it where just for some reason, now it was basically like a wing leveling system on the Cessna 172 that I flew, and you had a little heading bug, and you could make it hold a heading, or you could attach that with your IFR, doing, sync it up with the GPS so it follows your course that you want to go to. But yeah, I've had it before where you turn on the auto. Oh, I'll just turn the autopilot on here and save some time, and the plane just starts turning. And you're like, wait a minute. Okay, let's disconnect that. What's going on? Maybe adjust my little heading bug. Turn it on. Plane starts turning. So like, whenever you got to know how the system works, and you would do that. Okay, here we go. Let's get to number 3. Like any other airplane system, or if you got a new GPS in your plane or new radio or something added to the radio stack, you're going to want to learn that on the ground, not on a flight test in a cloud. Okay, so learn that on the ground. Take my word for it. Learn on the ground, because if you're on the ground, it's not, you don't have to worry about crashing or anything or failing a flight test. So learn that stuff on the ground. Every autopilot system in every airplane will have its own separate manual, or it could be in the private or the POH, the owner's handbook, operator's handbook of the plane. There, if that's in the plane, there is a manual that describes how to use it somewhere, and if there isn't, there should be. So learn that stuff on the ground. And here we go. Oh yeah, and then another thing too that I was talking about before is, before you take off, and I'm pretty sure this is standard on just about every plane with an autopilot, is you test to see if it works. And that's what really got me going the last time I was here, was that I was talking about how you can overpower the autopilot and stuff, but it didn't hit me till afterwards. Like, oh, that's right. I remember this is exactly how we used to do it. It tells you I haven't flown a plane with an autopilot in a while, but here we go. Test before flight. Okay, so the way that we used to do it, test before flight. So that was on a Piper Seminole. Yeah, pretty standard trainer for multi-engine training. And yeah, so what you would do is you would engage the autopilot, and then you would turn your little heading bug. It's just this little pointer that's on the heading indicator, and then you'd move it over here, and then you would see the control column moving this way. Move it back on the other side, so it would do a right turn. Move back the other way, and then see if you can overpower it. Yes, and then disconnect. So you'd and when you hit the disconnect, you want to listen for the beep. I've had it before where it'll disconnect, but the audible warning is not there. So that is not serviceable. So you got to have that audible warning. Yeah, so you test that before you fly. So left, right, overpower, disconnect. And the extra tip for disconnecting the autopilot, I heard this tip from a guy that came to talk to our class years ago, and he was flying CRJ Canadair regional jet, like a smaller jet, and he flew for Jazz, I think it was, here in Canada. So he was saying that on one of his check rides is that they simulate emergencies in the simulator, and for him, that he goofed up on was that what they did was they failed the autopilot disconnect that was on the yoke. And so in the simulator, they're coming into land, and you always, you're going to land manually. So, okay, autopilot disconnect, you fly it down and land it. But it didn't disconnect. And I forget, I don't know if he crashed it in the sim or what happened. But yeah, he just didn't know what was happening. Autopilot didn't disconnect. And then the training pilot was like, yeah, you just hit the big button there on the panel. So there's always, from every autopilot system, whether it's on a big jet or a little airplane, there's always a couple ways of turning it off. So, and I could see how that could definitely happen where you're on the yoke, your little thumb disconnect button. I could see that malfunctioning too, because what happens is the wires in little airplane anyways, a lot of those wires will go through the control column, and you're twisting, and over time they can break here and there, and they're not that thick, so or that flexible. Well, over time wires can break, and planes are all shaky anyways. So, yeah. So if it doesn't disconnect there, hit the one that's on the panel. You might pass your check ride at Jazz. And so, what else we got here? So this other thing here, that my last tip is it's kind of a general rule for everything in flying. So anticipate failure, not the failure of your flight test like I did, but like a system failure. Some component could fail, so anticipate that failing. And what would you do in that case? So anticipate failure. Okay, I just managed to squish it in there. Anticipate failure. I think my writing's getting worse as I get older, or the more I do it. But yeah, so what I used to do all the time when I was a pilot examiner, if I was ever testing somebody that had an electronic, like an electric trim in the airplane. Now that's if you don't know, trim is like, it's this little button basically that you can press, and it makes it so you don't have to muscle the controls as much. It takes away the control pressure from you a little bit, depending on your speed, what you're doing. You use that little trim. It could be a little wheel, could be a little button, but if it's an electronic one with the button, I always like to give an simulated emergency as an examiner as a trim runaway, which means that what happens if that you find that the trim, it's trimming all the way nose up or all the way nose down. Usually you can overpower that, but not necessarily. So depending on the aircraft, usually you can muscle it to where you want, and then at that point you would hold it in place. And then, so I did that with other people, and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. So I was like, well, a lot of times it would be, I would kind of give them a hint and say like, well, do you have a manual here? yeah, I'll look in the manual. And there's a way of doing that, but basically you can pull the circuit breaker on that motor, the electric motor that's making it do that, or just overpower it and keep flying. So anyways, I was always easy on that emergency because no one ever threw it at them before. But you want to see how the potential pilot would react. What would you do if that happened? And then they freak out and they're all nervous. They think they failed the test. But us pilot examiners they never really stop being instructors anyways. It's all kind of a learning process. So yeah, there we go. And or anticipating failure could be like, what if the button doesn't work there? It's handy to know what circuit breakers you can pull to disable what. So something like that. There's other autopilot. I was flying in one guy's airplane, and we never really figured it out. It was he had some kind of I forget what they call it. There's if you got like a pretty expensive plane, it kind of won't let you do anything goofy and dangerous, or I don't know, won't let you bank over 45 degrees, or it won't let your speed come back. It'll trim forward to keep your speed up. So I was trying to stall this guy's plane, and it just wouldn't let me, and it was doing weird stuff. Or we were doing some kind of a steeper turn, like a 60-degree bank turn, and I could feel the plane fighting me. And I was like, oh, what is that? And he's like, oh, it's the blah, blah, blah. And I forget what it's called. It's I don't really fly too many high-tech planes. But anyways, it was an idiot-proof plane. A lot of planes even have like a little button. You hit the button and it automatically gets you back to straight and level flight. So that's his plane had that, the holy crap button or whatever it's called. So anyways, let's go over this and see what's happening in the chat. So autopilot tips that I can give you anyways. And I'm sure there's a lot more out there, but there's tons of videos on this stuff on the YouTubes. So if you are going to be getting a new autopilot put into a plane, or something like that. I always think about lately I've been thinking if you get like a major avionics change with your airplane, adding newer GPS, radios, autopilots, and stuff like that. I think you should almost kind of consider that as if you're flying a brand new airplane, like a new type to you. Even though it's your plane, you're getting all these goodies put in it. Oh, it still looks the same. But the actual, if you really think about it, it's quite a different airplane than you used to have before with your steam gauges and your dialy radios and stuff like that. So, anyways, something to think about if you're getting a major upgrade to your airplane. Start kind of think of it as like, okay, I'm getting checked out on a new plane, and what would you do to if that was the case? So here we go. Autopilot tips. You are the pilot. No matter what, you turn that baby off, you're just flying just like you learned right at the beginning. And the autopilot is there to help you, like cruise control. It's not there to fly the plane. It is there to help you fly the plane. Okay, know the system that you got. Okay, is it more electrical? Is it are there cables, pulleys, anything like that that could be goofy? And okay, you would learn that on the ground. There's always a manual with whatever autopilot system you have, and you can do that. And there's quite a few YouTube videos on probably even your specific type of autopilot. So highly recommend knowing your equipment before you go up in the in the air. The time to figure that out is on the ground, not in the middle of a cloud for the first time. Test it out before you fly it. Can you overpower it? Will it go to the right? Will it go to the left? Will it disconnect? How do you what are the two ways you can disconnect it? And anticipate the failure of some sort of a component. Can it run away on you? Can it just be all of a sudden turning on you? Yeah. So as like with all things aviation, if you can think it'll mess up, eventually it'll mess up. And you got to kind of be able to roll with the punches there. So yeah, that is about it. We're gonna go through the chat here. It was a little bit piloty today, but I did want to clear the air about what autopilots can and can't do. Here we go. I always like it when people ask me questions here in the chat, because then I can say, oh, well, you see, as an expert. Well, I don't know. I'm more of an expert than some, less of an expert than others. So how do you feel when you hear that all these electric VTOLs, which stands for vertical takeoff and landing, will be self-driving with no pilot required? Well, Ranch, I've seen, I did a video on the Whisk air taxi before, and I researched that. And there's a few other of these things that are out there. And it seems to me that they do have a lot of redundancy built into them. They'll have 6 to 8 independent motors, and if one of them fails, it automatically goes to land. And then the other ones can overpower and stabilize it enough. There's some of these kind of have human oversight on the ground, and I would say it's the drone they're basically kind of just bigger drones, that you see the guys with their, I don't know, they're flying the drones around and off their cell phone and taking videos for YouTube. And it's like, even like with collision avoidance technology for those drones, it's pretty amazing. Like I've seen some videos, like this guy's walking through a forest and this drone's just following him, and it's figuring out how to go around all the trees and stuff without hitting it. That's an expensive drone, but that tech is pretty amazing. So I think it will be pretty high tech. And would I ever go on one of those in good weather? Maybe, probably, eventually. I wouldn't be the first. I wouldn't be a test pilot or a crash test dummy in one of those things, but I think eventually they're going to be pretty rock solid for their reliability and safety record. It could be safety. It's probably going to be safety. It's probably going to be safer than driving your car. So, but with no pilot required, It might have to. I might have to come to that just because there's hardly any pilots out there anymore. No one wants to do the job, or there's just there's kind of all the baby boomers are retiring off, and no one's there to train the new pilots, and there's a real shortage going on there. Well, it's not super shortage critical yet, but yeah, if as the population grows, it's there's going to be more airplanes in the air, and you're going to need more pilots, and we could get more automation in there. We'll see. Time will tell. No one ever thought that we could ever fly a 747 with only two crew. They always thought you needed a third, a flight engineer there. Okay, here we go. Harold, he was about to test fly his drone and see if he can get it high enough to see Windsor. Well, you can easily see Windsor from your drone if you just go down to the Renaissance Center at the Detroit River. You can see right across there. But it is, if you are going to fly a drone, be careful about that. And if I'm not mistaken, you are not allowed to fly drones across the international border. So if you wanted to, if Harold, if you wanted to drop me off something over here in Windsor and you're on the other side of the river, you can't drop it off with your drone for me. And because people have tried that before, dropping things off over the border with drones, and they kind of get arrested. But I think that kind of had more to do with what they were dropping off. So, but yeah, it happens. It can be done. Okay. Okay. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so Wrench, used to work at Bendix King, so he knows a bit about this stuff. Since Autopilot needs to be STC'd, which stands for Special Type Certificate, might be only one brand is legal for a specific plane. At Bendix King, he designed Autopilot servos and flux compass parts. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, okay, that's cool. Flux, so the flux compass parts, that would be for the HSI, I guess. Eh? Ooh, fancy. All right. There could be. When it comes to certified aircraft, there's the paperwork has to be done correctly. Okay. Oh, here we go. Garmin sells an automatic landing button now. Sounds scary. I've seen videos about that, and it's pretty amazing. But I don't know. It's like in the case of a totally emergency incapacitated pilot, the passenger hits a button and the plane goes in and lands, I think the computer would probably do a better job of landing than the passenger if the passenger wasn't a pilot. So, what? Harold's going to try to send me something, but he won't address it to me. Okay, very good. Anyways, yeah, so that's cool. All right, so today is Wednesday. So, yeah, Christmas is coming up here too. What day is it? It's Christmas is. Oh, looks like I got to do a Christmas show. It's going to be on Monday. Oh, well, looks like that's the way it's going to have to be. Why? Because I do this Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon Eastern. And I think I'm going to, I will just kind of shut her down, and I'll talk to you guys before Christmas. So that's about it. Thank you for watching. Bye.